back to the PSU Big Apple podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Bonner, and for today, I'm really excited to speak with Emely Santana, a registered nurse in the Pediatric ICU at NYU Langone Hospital. She is a 2010 Penn State grad from the College of Health and Human Development and a 2015 Johns Hopkins School of Nursing graduate. Emely, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and just honored.
Thank you.
Yeah,
There's a lot that we want to definitely get into, I'm sure,
sure.
specifically related to your career and post Penn State in New York. But
Yeah.
do you mind just kind of giving us a bit of like growing up, where you grew up and what led you to Penn State?
Yeah, of course. So actually, my parents are from the Dominican Republic. We are immigrants to the United States. So I came here when I was 4. I was born in Mexico, which is like another story, but essentially we lived in the Dominican Republic until I was 4 years old. We came here. My parents brought us here to, give me and my siblings a better opportunity when it came to education and just lifestyle. Um, you know, DR is a third world country. So we had this opportunity and my parents took it. And yeah, growing up, my parents are both, they're working professionals. They, went to college in the Dominican Republic and they've always been like into academics. They're both chemists.
Wow.
So just like growing up, it was just very much ingrained into us how important education was. And, that's just how it was in my household. You had to be a straight A student. They were always very strict with that. So when it came down to applying to colleges, I knew I wanted to go somewhere. I did well in high school. I wanted to go to a prestigious school, and I got into all the. I'm originally from New Jersey. So I got into all like the Rutgers and some of the schools that I applied to like close by, but it actually and Penn State was a big one that I had in mind as well. But it wasn't until I went on like a weekend. I think it was called the Reach program, specifically for minorities. Where you essentially go for a few days and you go to campus and you get buddied up with a student and they show you around. And so my friend Katrina Perez, who introduced us, she is a year older than me, and she had already been at Penn State. And so me and my best friend took the opportunity and we went. And I just fell in love with it, the campus, the culture, the community. I honestly, I wasn't sure if I was gonna pick Penn State, but it was just kind of, once I got there, it was like a no-brainer for me. And my parents were very much like, yeah, no, stay in state. It's going to be so expensive. And I had gotten into Rutgers and my brother went to Rutgers, but it was just one of those things where like you knew where your heart was at. And I just knew like my heart was in PSU. So it was kind of like a no-brainer once that like those few days that I spent there, it just kind of like all clicked, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to Penn State. And I was lucky to have my best friend, who I've known since I was 7, take that journey with me, and we were roommates throughout all of college. And that's like how I came to Penn State.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean,
yeah,
those like initial, when you're in high school, those trips I think are really valuable to
yeah,
get a
yeah,
feel for it.
for
Um,
sure.
Depending
Yeah,
on when you hit it, if it's in the winter, it's like, oh man, it's a little brutal here,
right.
but in the
Yeah.
summer, it's
I think
nice.
I want to say that it was sometime in the spring. I don't remember for sure, but it wasn't like freezing cold. And what was special about the program was like, when you go and visit, it's sometimes when you go visit colleges, it's like a day trip sometimes. You don't really get to like indulge in
Yeah.
like, this is what it's going to look like for me as a student here. And I really got to do that. Like you get to sit in classes and you get to, dine in with like other people, other college students, and, you get to party a little. It was great.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I don't know if they still have that, but that is really what pulled me in. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
you choose to go to Penn State.
Yeah.
I love that your parents are chemists and you're in kind of the science realm yourself.
Right. Right.
Did you always know that's what you wanted to do, or did you kind of get it in your freshman year and wanted to look around a little bit?
No, so my journey basically when I was in high school, I worked for, I had a little part time and I worked for a pediatric dentist. And I thought going into college that that's what I wanted to do. I want to be a pediatric dentist. I knew I wanted to work with kids. And, just having that experience kind of like, all right, I could see myself doing this. And I loved the sciences. So when I first started off at Penn State, I was actually a chemistry major. Um, and it wasn't until I think it was the second year where I took like organic chemistry and I was like, oh, this is not for me. Like I did well with like chemistry 1 and 2, and I did well with bio. But when organic chemistry came around, I was just like, it was just like a different language for me. And I was just kind of like, maybe this is not for me, because I'd have to get through even like more difficult sciences, and it just wasn't clicking. I wasn't getting like the passion out of it.
Right, right.
So that's when I switched to the College of Health and Human Development, and I decided to go for a major in biobehavioral health. And BBH is what they called it. And I don't know if you've heard of it, because it's very like specialized and different. And even like to this day, when I explain that major or I say, oh, this is what I majored in, everybody's always like, wait, what is that? I've never heard of it. It's very unique. And I think Penn State has like, that program is very specific to Penn State.
Can you explain what it is a little bit for the audience who may not know?
Yeah. So, of course, yeah. So it's essentially the study of how our genetics, our behaviors, our culture, all affect our health. So, where you come from, your racial background, your genes, and then your behaviors, like how the things that you eat, how much you exercise,
Wow.
If it kind of tails into all of like our actual behaviors that we go through day by day, and essentially how they impact your health,
Wow.
whether in a good way or a bad way, or, stress, all of that stuff. So it was fascinating, and it still involved a lot of science, which is what I loved.
Right.
But just a little bit more of like a psychological, social piece to it. And it was great. I loved every minute of it. I loved all of the classes. I studied a lot about stress and the impact of stress on our bodies, anxiety, how it can affect, anything from like your mental health to illness. So it was great. And like I said, it was definitely one of a kind. So I went with that. And because I didn't switch my major until I think like my second year, I was a little bit behind. I graduated in the summer of 2010. But it was all good because I was happy, I felt like that's where my heart was at. So
yeah, no, that's great. I mean, the one thing about school is you can go and you can kind of dip your toes in the water depending on what you think you're interested in. I mean, me personally, I jumped around a few times and I landed in College of Comms, and it's perfectly fine to do that.
Right. No, 100%. I think it's really hard I always say this too, to like, people that are either going into college. Like, I think it's really hard to ask a 17 or 18-year-old, like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? That's such a big question. And it's like, what do you really know at 17 or 18? Like, I didn't know, you know what I mean? So I always say, like, try and just like your first couple semesters, just take your like basic courses and then see what you're really good at, or where your heart is at, or what really finds you joy. And I wish that I had that advice beforehand. I think that, just with my culturally and like the way that I grew up with my parents, they were like, oh, okay, great, you're going to be a dentist. Awesome. Go for that. You know what I mean? And it wasn't like, all right, just try to find yourself.
Right.
It was like, all right, go to school, get an education, because that's what we came here to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Be a professional. So, so yeah, it's tough, but it's good if you can like, dip your toes into like what you said, into like different areas and figure out where, what suits you best, then that's what you go and do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. That's great advice. So you're kind of winding down at Penn State, you get your
Hmm.
degree, and
Hmm.
walk me through your thought process on, okay, like I'm graduating, there's, career, workforce life, and then
Yeah.
obviously Johns Hopkins came into your
Yeah.
mirror
Yeah.
at some point.
Right.
Can you
Yeah.
explain how that went down?
Yeah. So when I graduated, I was a little bit, I don't want to say lost, but I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to be in healthcare, because I had worked with patients in high school, and I knew I wanted to work with kids. I just wasn't sure did I want to, go to be a physician assistant? I didn't even really think of nursing until later on. I think when I graduated, I was just like, all right, let me try to find a job in some sort of healthcare setting and then take it from there. So luckily, my first job out of college was at Memorial Sloan-Kettering, and I was a physician office assistant there. And I was working with patients just in an office setting and not actually hands on, but I decided to take an EMT class just to get a little bit of like hands on care
Hmm.
experience. So I became an AMD. I did that. I volunteered a few hours, during the week. And that's really where I found, like, between working at Sloan Kettering and working hands on as an EMT, I feel like that's where I found that nursing was for me, because I was working with nurses in both settings, and I just, I saw that I loved the bedside of it. I love you're actually directly working with patients. You're with them in like their most vulnerable times. You're caring for them. It just kind of like all clicked.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go to nursing school then. And I took I needed to like complete some prerequisite courses to get into an accelerated program. Um, so I did that all while I was working and volunteering. Those were like probably the busiest few years of my life, because I was working full time. I was volunteering multiple times a day at the ambulance corps, and I was taking classes. Sometimes I'm like, wow, how did I do that? But when you're when you're like 22, 23, you just feel like you have all the energy in the world. And
Yeah.
I was just like going, going, going. And I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And I applied to a couple programs because it was, and now still to this day, they have a lot of accelerated programs for people who want to change careers and go into nursing, which is great. Like, you don't have to go back for like a traditional 4-year nursing program. You can just complete it in like, sometimes a year and a half. My program was 13 months
Hmm.
at Hopkins. And when I got into Hopkins, I was just like, all right, like, it's Hopkins, right? I gotta go. It's
Right.
one of the best medical school in our country, and the nursing school was also high up there. So it was just kind of like a no-brainer for me. I was like, guess I'm going to Baltimore. And I went back to school. It was the most brutal 13 months of my life, because literally it was back like there was no breaks. It was like maybe 5 days or like a week in between semesters, but like I never got to come home.
Right.
It was really tough. I came home for maybe like a Thanksgiving, and that was honestly, it was tough. It was tough. If I wanted to come home, it had to be like on a weekend and for like very brief, um, a very brief break. But I just wanted to get it over and done with. So I
Right.
chose that route, but it was definitely very grueling. And, I had like multiple exams a week and papers due like all the time. It was rough. It was rough, but I got through it, and I graduated in 2015. And so I've been a nurse now for, it'll be 6 years. Yeah. At the end of
Wow.
this year. Yeah.
I mean, that's so
Yeah.
cool that there's these different options that you can take depending on like
Yeah.
if you have to work and then you can only do night classes or if you can do an
Right.
accelerated program. I mean, one of my questions was going to be, what's the difference between Penn
Yeah.
State and Johns Hopkins? And clearly, it's
Yeah.
just like you're just fully in it,
Oh
twenty
yeah,
four
no, it was
seven.
just straight. There was no fun at Hopkins. But like, I mean, it was it was great being in nursing school. Like nursing school was like obviously I loved what I was learning, but there was not that like work life balance. It was just like work, 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 study, 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 study. And
Yeah.
you're also surrounded by like type A personalities, and it was tough. It was tough, but at the end of the day, I don't regret it. I'm glad that I did it, but for sure, two very different experiences. I always say, Dan, I wish I went. I wish I knew back when I was at Penn State that I wanted to be a nurse, and I would have just did nursing. But honestly, I don't regret either, because I feel like I got so much out of both.
Right,
So
right. That's what's I think is really
yeah,
interesting about individuals' career paths is that
yeah,
they ultimately end up somewhere doing something, but the ways and the channels and the experiences that you go through to get there. A lot of people can say they're a nurse, but you can say that
sure,
you have this interesting background in what you learned at Penn State, and then
yeah.
coupled. So I want to get into kind of your career as an RN in New York, but
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you can explain a little bit about that. But I also want to understand, when I think of an RN, and I don't know I'm not a big health medical
Right.
nerd, but so
Sure,
it's
sure.
hard. But I want to understand like maybe a common misconception about what an RN is, because think clearly there's a variety of different types of RNs.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I would love to go into kind of where you fall, and then more so like the spectrum of that.
Right. Yeah. I know there like nursing is, I feel like that's the beauty of it. There are so many different types of nurses out there. And I don't know what your idea of a nurse is, if it's just like, the one that comes in and like takes your vital signs and gives you your medications.
Yeah,
Yeah.
generally, yeah. I mean,
Right. Yeah. So I work at NYU Langone. I'm in the pediatric ICU. I didn't initially start there. I actually started in the pediatric acute floor. So it's just general pediatrics. So the kids are not, essentially, they're not as sick as they are in the ICU. So, like I said, I always knew I wanted to work in peds, and I started on the acute floor, and I was there for a couple of years, and I just felt like I needed a little bit of a challenge, and so I went to the ICU. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to like what I do is bedside nursing. So we see anything at NYU, from kids that are getting surgical procedures to kids that come in with something that acutely happens to them, whether it's an asthma attack or a respiratory virus or COVID-19,
right.
to kids that get diagnosed with cancer and need chemotherapy. So I am a certified pediatric nurse, and then on top of that, I'm also a certified chemotherapy nurse, and I also I'm a certified bone marrow transplant nurse. So I
Wow.
take care of a lot of the kids that require ICU care. Which is the difference between acute care and ICU is you're essentially a little bit sicker, but you also require more attention from the doctors and from the nurses. So I went from having sometimes 4 or 5 patients on an acute floor to having just 1 or 2 in the ICU. So these kids just need like very frequent monitoring. We're watching all of their vital signs. Sometimes they are on medications, through their IV that require a lot of monitoring, titration. And so yeah, they're just essentially a little bit more sicker.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of like my role. I do administer chemotherapy, and I see a lot of the oncology patients, and those are like my favorite patients. But it's great. It's tough. It's essentially, like you are seeing kids at their very, very worst, and you're also seeing parents seeing their kids at their very,
I
very
know.
worst. So nursing in general, right? There's the pediatric nursing mostly is, you have two patients. You have the actual pediatric patient and you have the parents.
Right.
So it's managing how to, take care of both. It's not just taking care of that patient. It's also providing a lot of education to both, and I see kids from, you know, 0 to 18 years of age. Sometimes a little bit older, but it's also kind of tweaking. Like, I can't speak to a 18-year-old the way I would speak to like a 5-year-old, so it's
Yeah.
also like tweaking how you're going to explain things. Like, this is what I'm going to do. Sometimes like a 3-year-old is not going to allow you to like give them certain medications. So it's like holding them down or, getting child life involved to kind of like explain what's going to happen. Because when you're a kid and you're in the hospital, you're usually very scared, right? It's like, why am I sick, or why am I here? And why are you putting this inside of me,
Yeah.
So that's, I think, like in a nutshell, that is what I do. So it's not just like, obviously, like what most people think of nursing as, like the caring and like, giving medications and assessing. It's also like the social piece too, of providing a lot of education and providing a lot of comfort, right?
Yeah.
To the parents, to the patient, and just communicating constantly with your team, with your doctors and your attendings, and social work that comes in, and the physical therapists. And it's a lot. It's a very, very multidisciplinary job. So
Yeah. I right off the bat, I have to just
yeah.
applaud you and thank you for your service to the New York
Thank you.
community. I mean, especially
Yeah.
after this year,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
come to
Thank you.
light.
I appreciate that. I
And
appreciate
it's
that.
it's
Yeah.
overwhelming to hear that as just
Yeah.
someone on the
Yeah.
outside. You don't
Yeah.
think about the patients, the parents, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
children. That
Course. Yeah.
God, I have to like take a moment to just really wrap my head
I've,
around it because there's so
yeah.
many aspects of it that you don't think about.
Yeah, yeah. I've had to wrap my head around it many times too. I think like every once in a while I have to step back and like really do that, because it's my job, right? So you wake up, you go in and you just like do it. And sometimes you do feel a little robotic, because it's just like, this is what I got to do, right? Um but yeah, it is important to kind of like take it into like perspective and kind of step outside of it every once in a while. Like, a lot of times, you have to like have that empathy, right? Like, I have 9 nieces and nephews, and so sometimes when kids come in and they're really sick, sometimes I think, wow, this could be my niece,
Hmm.
and how would I want, the nurse taking care of her to be like, you know what I mean? Or what would I want to hear if I was like that parent or that aunt or whatever? I think that part is also really, really important, because it's human, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like just kind of stepping back every once in a while is important. And as an ICU nurse, you're really trained to kind of like, right, look at the numbers, and like, everything is about attention to detail, and being super on top of things, right? That sometimes you do really miss that other piece of like, all right, I need to also be compassionate and, and caring and nurturing, and just kind of like think, wow, how would I feel if this was my situation? So this past year has been a lot of that, naturally. And it's been tough. It's been
Yeah.
tough, but we're trying to make it through. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely there's some light at the end of the tunnel with regard to
yeah,
COVID.
yeah,
And
definitely. Yeah,
I definitely want to touch on, that you brought up the topic of just mental health, and especially
yeah,
highlighting that over the last year and the importance of it,
right.
and stepping back.
Yeah,
Obviously it's a very you have to be completely focused,
yeah,
24/7 at your job, because
right.
it's lives are on the line.
Sure. Yeah.
So it may not directly translate into another type of job,
Mhm.
but how important is it to step away and kind of do a
Oh
self-assessment?
man. Yeah, so important. And I actually, to be honest with you, I didn't learn that until this pandemic hit. And I've been, like I said, I've been a nurse for 6 years, and I've seen really tough cases. I've seen patients pass, like, I've seen kids at their worst. I've seen parents at their worst. But for whatever reason, this really like it hit a toll. It really took a toll on me mentally, physically, emotionally, um, and I think. And it was, definitely multifactorial, right? Everybody was working from home, and I still had to go into work, right? There was no work from home for me.
Right.
Um, I was going into the city, and it was like, it felt like a deserted town, which I've never seen. Like, imagine like driving and commuting and like driving down the FDR and always like having to deal with traffic and then like nothing, right?
Yeah.
I was like, it was just so like such a cultural shock for me. It literally felt like a desert out there. Like no one was out there, right? And
Yeah.
so we're like the only ones going in, and you're going about your day. You're taking care of these patients. For me, the COVID was not in the pediatric population, was not as prevalent as it is with the adults, but we
Right.
did still see, pediatric patients with COVID. But because it was not as prevalent, we were taking on my floor adult patients with COVID.
Wow.
So we kind of had to like, help the other units that were really like just full and overwhelmed with
Right.
patients, just to kind of help them out. So I had to just switch from being a pediatric nurse to like learning how to be an adult nurse, which I've never had an interest in doing, right? I'm
Right.
only about pediatric kids,
Yeah.
patients. And so I had to just like completely do like all right, well, now I'm an adult nurse, and now I'm dealing with adults and adult conditions, and it was just so different, right?
Wow.
On top of, dealing with COVID and going in and like being worried about, am I going to get COVID from this patient? Am I going to get COVID and maybe like, give it to somebody else that I
Right.
love, right? So I was like overwhelmed, of course. And it wasn't just me, it was all of our coworkers, me and my coworkers and everybody that was working. Um, During like the time where, right, New York City was the epicenter of it all. Um, and it was just tough, and I had to really just take a step back. And I think that honestly, the good thing that came out of this pandemic has been just like how life has slowed down. um, and things are coming, we're going back to the quote unquote norm slowly but surely, but life just was forced to slow down for me. And it really helped me just take a minute to do some self-reflection and really like tap into like what was causing, my anxiety and my stresses, and really say like, wow, I A, need to like talk about it, and B, need to do something about it, because it starts to affect you as a professional, right? Like it just starts to affect your work. And so if you don't take care of yourself, how are you supposed to show up and like take care of others? Um, so yeah, I mean, I went from never really even thinking about therapy to saying, all right, I need to talk to a professional first and foremost, and I need to do things that I know make me feel good, right? So
Mm-hmm.
exercising and eating the right foods, spending time with, and at that point, right, we were all quarantining, so it wasn't really spending time with, but at least like making sure that I checked in on like my loved ones, and had like a conversation with my best friends about like how hard it's been and like the reality of it. Because I know that a lot of people were listening to it on the news and stuff, but it's very different for somebody to really like tell you like this is what happened today, and this was like my day. So yeah, it was I it was tough, but I took a lot of positive things from it. So
Yeah.
um, definitely so important to just like check in with yourself, and do the things that are good, both for your body physically, but just mentally too, like learning how to decompress. I think we, like, as healthcare providers, we kind of force ourselves to leave work at work because it can be so emotionally like overwhelming. You don't want
Right.
to bring it home, but you do either way, right? Unless you're just like a cold-hearted person and you just like,
Right.
completely shut off, but you do like you just think about, wow, like I had this patient who passed and nobody was there at his bedside, like that's tough, man. That's
Yeah.
tough. Um, so yeah, it was definitely a year of reflection and just, getting myself like in the right place mentally.
Yeah. And it's weird to hear you kind of share that's every day. It could be
Mhm.
you don't know what's going to happen,
Yeah.
and then you have these situations where families are grieving or going through things, but you as a community inside the hospital are also like mentally you have to go through that. What is the environment like? I guess maybe pre and
Hmm.
post-ish COVID, like you clearly have to have a really good group
Oh my God, yes. Yeah.
peers and
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
has it just completely changed for like a more tighter like understanding
Yeah.
over the last year?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that to begin with, working in the ICU, you're already in, at least for me and for us at NYU, you're already. I love the people that I work with. They're literally, you're with them through some of the saddest moments and some of the happiest as well. But that culture of like teamwork and just like having people to depend on was there beforehand, before all of COVID. I think a lot of people that probably work in the ICU can relate to that. Because you just have to help each other out. You just have to. Some of these kids are just so sick. You cannot do it on your own. So there's already that sense of like community and like camaraderie. But oh my God, for sure, when COVID came, it was like we really all came together, and it was tough because things were changing constantly and people were, reasonably upset with, the lack of um, equipment that we had and having to like, reuse masks and, when it was like really, really tough for us.
Yeah.
There was definitely a lot of hostility, but I think that, we all just kind of like came together and said, all right, well, this is what we got to do. So let's make the best of this and let's do what we do the best way that we can. So I think that it just like tightened our relationships and our bonds as healthcare providers, and it was great. I am so grateful and thankful for everybody that I work with and I'm not just talking about healthcare providers. I'm talking about like, the people that come and like take the trash out. It's like
Right.
everybody came together as a team, and it definitely helps to like just build that resilience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, obviously you've probably learned so much. You've been through so many things. You've come out a different person. Um,
Yeah,
what
sure.
what has kept you motivated to continue doing this? I mean, there's certainly a lot of low points that you shared. I'm sure that happen all the time, but
Yeah,
what has kept you in the position motivated to go
yeah.
to work every day?
You know what? I just feel like there were also so many like there were so many senior nurses that I remember talking to when it was like the peak of COVID, and even them telling me like we've never been through something like this before. And I just felt like, wow, like this is history in the making, right? And I'm living it, and I'm like here as a frontline worker, and I I've never experienced this, and nurses that have been here for like 30 plus years have never experienced this. Like this is only going to make me stronger, right? If we
Yeah.
get through this together, there's nothing that's going to come my way that I'm going to be like, wow, like oh my God, I'm going to like freaking out like the way we were when COVID came, because I just feel better prepared already, right? Like mentally, physically, emotionally. I've been through like a really tough time. So I think that that's kind of what keeps me going, because it's just like, wow, this was really bad, but um, I'm hopeful that things get better, and things have gotten better. But if something else comes around, or there's another wave or whatever, then you're just like equipped, right?
Right.
Because you've been through that experience. And now I feel better equipped, just like on a spiritual level, to also handle it, mentally myself.
Yeah.
So, I'm just kind of like, bring it on,
Yeah.
like, I got this. So,
You have to be
yeah.
a special person to be
Yeah.
able to be in this field. I mean, there's no doubt
Yes.
about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, it definitely, it's not for everyone. And yes, you do have to, really learn how to manage it all, and just like take it in. But yes, there are so many special people that I work with, and I'm grateful for all of them. I feel like I learn from everyone, and it's not just, the doctors and the nurses, and it's literally just everyone who's in that hospital setting. Um, so I'm thankful. It's a great team to be a part of, and I don't take it for granted, and I don't have any regrets either. I honestly, if I had to do it over, I wouldn't say like, oh, I would never want to be a nurse during this pandemic. Like, no, I would say like, yeah, I was meant for this. Like, this is
Yeah.
what I was meant to do, and I was, the whole time I was like, I'm honored to be here and to be fighting this fight. It's not everyone can do it, no, but for whatever reason, this is what I was put on this earth to do. So here I am.
Yeah. And everyone is and should be grateful for the healthcare workers.
Thank
It's been
you.
a really
Yeah.
remarkable year, and
Yeah.
medicine in general, it blows my mind.
It blows my mind too.
It's
I
unbelievable
know. I
what
can't
they can
believe how far
accomplish.
we've come. Yes. I to this day, I'm always like, wow, I cannot believe, the things that have happened and where we are now with COVID, and especially in the city. Like,
Yeah.
we're doing so great. People are getting their vaccines, and it's truly fascinating. So yeah, I feel the same way. Like, oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah.
And it just makes me even more proud to be a part of science, and
Exactly.
and this, this community. It really does. So yeah, I'm always grateful. I say that all the time. There are some days I do not want to go into work. I won't lie. There are some days where I'm just like, I can't do it. I can't do it. But I genuinely love what I do, and I'm grateful for that. I really am.
Yeah. Um, so Penn State has the "we are" phrase,
Yeah.
and you can kind of you could take that phrase and kind of imagine what that means to you. But my question to you is, what's your personal mantra? What do you
Oh
take
yeah.
with you every day? What can you share with the audience in that
Yeah,
same
I,
way?
I love this question. And I've been into the mantras this whole year. So my favorite mantra, and I feel like I say this to myself pretty much every day, whether I'm going into work or not, is show up for yourself before you show up for others. And really, for me, that can look like different depending on the day, but it just means that you should always do something for yourself, whether it's, something that brings you joy, whether it's exercise, or, having a good cup of coffee in the morning, or taking 5 minutes to meditate, or, going for a walk, or whatever it is. Do something that brings you joy, before you can go out and do things for others, right? And for me, it's profound, because I'm a nurse, and I'm the person taking care of
Right.
others, right? um that oftentimes you forget that you got to take care of yourself, and I have to remind myself that in order for me to be the best person that I can be, and the best nurse, or the best, sister, daughter, friend, I have to be in the right place, and I have to find things that bring me joy. So yeah, do something for yourself before you do for others. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's
my,
that's
that's my
That's
mantra.
that's great advice. And I love that question too, because you never know what kind of answer you're gonna get.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's always really heartfelt and true. It
Yeah.
rings true. And I love that it could be very complex or it could be very simple. Like just
Right.
cleaning your desk so that you're ready
Right.
to focus on the day
Exactly. Exactly.
can bring you joy.
It doesn't have to be anything big. Like it doesn't mean that you have to go and do like a an hour hit class before, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It could be very, very simple. Sometimes it's those really small things that bring you joy and you don't realize it until you actually like reflect on it and you say, all right, you know, today I'm going to give myself 5 minutes. Like what is 5 minutes in a day? If you think about it, right? 5 minutes just for myself, just for me. That's so, so important. It's so profound. And it sets the tone for the day and it really makes a difference on how you show up for other people. So
Yeah.
that's my advice, man. And hopefully it resonates with others.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed you showing up for this
Yeah.
podcast.
Thank you so much for
It
having
was
me.
really interesting.
Yeah, of
Thank you for sharing your story.
course.
Again, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank
We're
you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
going through some
Yeah.
tough times, but
Yeah.
we're glad to have you there, and we're glad to have
Yeah.
you up in the Penn State community. So
Amazing. Yes. I'm always so proud of that. You know, Penn State proud always. So, and I'm
uh,
so happy that that we made this connection because I feel like I kind of have lost a little bit of touch with my Penn State community. I still have obviously my friends, but this is great and community is so important. So thank you for what you're doing. This is such an awesome initiative, and I'm so proud that you did this during a very difficult year. You know, where we were not making connections, and
yeah.
this is so so important on so many levels. So thank you for that. This is awesome. You should be proud of yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
It's great when you're kind of stuck with different things that you have to overcome. This
yeah,
was like the manifestation of not being able to be with people, but here we
yeah,
are with technology sharing stories with our community. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
really happy to have you up on the podcast.
Thank you. It was an honor. It was an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.